No, all signs show to them not being a team that will be winning a championship anytime soon.
You fall for me like I fall for you.
Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. It's your boy Dom, and we're gonna get right into things here today. So, today, we are talking about the Portland Trailblazers. More specifically, we're talking about Damian Lillard, but before we kind of jump into that, I do want to kind of talk about, the GM thing and everything like that for them. So, what they ended up doing was they got rid of their former GM, and I believe they promoted a guy, who was kind of below him for that general manager job. And now they are looking to make some moves potentially. Now, apparently in the offseason, Damian Lillard had suggested that they trade for Ben Simmons, which is interesting because really the only way asset-wise that would work would be what the Sixers would want in Damian Lillard for Ben Simmons, or maybe more of what the Trailblazers would want in a CJ for Ben Simmons type of thing. And that didn't end up happening. And instead of bringing in, one of the league's best defenders and stuff like that, they went out and they got a decent guy in Larry Nance who, you can get some steals and everything like that. Pretty solid pickup for them. But they've been one of the worst. Well, sorry, not one of the worst. They are the worst defensive team in the league. And really, it's not even close. I mean, this team just doesn't have good perimeter defenders. They don't have any interior shot blocking, and they're really just not that great of a, even defensive personnel, right? Because in order to be a good defensive team, not only do you have to have the personnel, but you also have to have the system or the mindset or whatever it may be. And this team doesn't have any of that. I mean, this team is atrocious on the defensive end. And as of today, they are not even in the play-in picture. They are actually below Sacramento in the standings. Which coming into the season, I don't know how many people would have predicted for Sacramento and Minnesota to be above Portland in the standings. And that's, they have a decent roster, the Trailblazers have, but just, really your only perimeter defensive options are Robert Covington, Larry Nance, and then maybe some Nasir Little. Those three guys. That's all you've got. Because I know damn well Dame and CJ aren't going to defend anything. I know damn well Ben McLemore and Anthony Simons, Tony Snell, Norman Powell's kind of small. So yeah, he's got some length if you play him at the 2, but if you play him at the 3, he's pretty small. Isn't that great of a defender there. And that's really it. And then interiorly, what you're looking at defensively down there is like a Cody Zeller or a Yusuf Nurkic, which neither of them are particularly good on the defensive end. So not only do you not have the perimeter defense to make up for some lack of shot blocking, but you also don't have the shot blocking to make up for the lack of the perimeter defense. So it's just a complete negative on both fronts, which is the big problem with this team at this point. And so in order for them to kind of get back on track, they would really need a roster overhaul of personnel-wise because just a lot of the guys on their roster, you can't. I mean, if you brought in Andre Roberson to this roster, he would probably get 20 minutes a game because you would just need him out there to play some defense on somebody because you just don't have guys to play defense, which is something to say because Roberson hasn't been in the league in years, I don't think. Although when he was a very good defender. He just couldn't shoot. But yeah, anyways, back to Damian Lillard. So a report came out from Woj just a couple days ago where he said that the most complicating factor in Portland's GM search is Damian Lillard's desire to be extended and become the NBA's highest paid player in his mid-30s. Which shows a lot, I think, to me. So, even though he was like pushing for a Ben Simmons thing or something like that, or he noticed, because if you're doing that, you know that you don't have the defensive personnel, and you're like, okay, I want to try playing with this guy. Let's move some things around. Let's shuffle this roster up. We've been doing the same thing for years, and it hasn't worked. And he was taking the initiative on that, but to a point, there's blind loyalty, and then there's loyalty and leverage, right? Two, I think, very important words when you're talking about the NBA. Leverage is commonly more and more used by NBA players in today's league, and more specifically by stars in today's league, right? It's how players force their way out of situations by just requesting a trade. And if you're a star player, other than Ben Simmons, every star player that has requested a trade gets their trade. And that's because Ben Simmons is just recently locked up on a long-term extension, so Philadelphia really has kind of all the leverage in their ballpark. And then also there is loyalty. And Damian Lillard is a guy that, throughout his career, and especially as of the last few years, has really been praised for his loyalty. Bradley Beal's another guy like that. But there's a certain point where it's loyalty to a fault, right? Now, the Wizards have gotten back on track this year. In fact, the Wizards are a better team than Portland, which I think nobody would have guessed. So Bradley Beal's loyalty is somewhat paying off for him, though I don't think they're a contender by any means. He's, he'll be in the playoffs or whatever, leading his team. It seems like he wants to be the number one guy or whatever, wherever he is, and that's what he's getting to do. So, to a point, you can't blame him for that, right? If you just want to be the number one option and see what you can do out there against other NBA teams and see how far you can take a team, maybe that's just his goal, right? And he just likes where he's living and everything like that. But then there's Damian Lillard, a guy that is clearly a number one guy. Even if you sent him to another team, like, are you telling me if he was traded, say that the Damian Lillard Ben Simmons thing happened, right? Are you telling me he wouldn't be the number one in crunch time to Joel Embiid? Damian Lillard is the one taking the shot to end the game. Joel Embiid, and it's arguable who's the better player there. It'd be like a 1A, 1B type of thing. But I think Damian Lillard, being the perimeter player, especially in today's league, would still be the number one option with a top 10 player on his team. So it's hard to say that his loyalty is getting him too far, because he doesn't have all this, like we just went over, his roster. He doesn't have a roster to conduct winning. I mean, they've made the conference finals once with the roster they have, and they just continue to be mediocre. Just not a very impressive team the last few years. I mean, you don't really even have to turn on Blazers games to kind of be like if you've watched Blazers games in the last 5 years, you know what a Blazers game is going to be like for them. Now maybe one night Damian Lillard goes for 60 or whatever, but you understand the roster and what these guys can do, because just the same main guys together with some little tad bits of changes for the 8th and 9th man on the roster or whatever, right? I don't know. It's interesting to me, because if he hopes to be the highest paid player in the league, he's already a pretty high paid player at this point in time. And, if you're thinking that in your mid-30s, when you're like 35 or something like that, that you want to be one of the highest paid players, it makes me question if you want to win a championship, because you've shown, a little bit of initiative on, you want to trade for something, but you're just so loyal, there's no pressure you'll put on the organization, whereas a guy like Giannis, right, who I think we all have looked at and said, yeah, Giannis is a loyal guy, right, to Milwaukee. And Milwaukee took a chance on him, and he stayed with Milwaukee and everything like that, and they ended up winning a championship. Well, in Giannis' situation, he put pressure on the organization. He pretty much was like, hey, you guys gotta make something happen here. We just need a better roster, right? And what exactly did they go do? They extended Chris Middleton to keep him so that they could make Giannis happy. They brought in Drew Holiday. They have Brook Lopez. They've done all these things to help continually improve the roster year in and year out. Even a guy like Bobby Portis, who they brought in, was, very helpful for them in their finals run last year. And it's something that the Blazers haven't really done, right? The Blazers are like, okay, we got you CJ, we got you Nurkic years ago from the Nuggets, and yeah, I mean, we'll just throw some stuff around. I guess we'll pick up Rocco here and Larry Nance there, but not constantly making moves to just keep getting better. They're just kind of shuffling guys in and out, and not, shuffling guys in and out and just being in a linear situation rather than growing as like a roster or a team or anything like that, which I think is very showing. And so back to Damian Lillard's contract. At this point, he is making $39 million this year, and then he has a $48.7 million opt-out when he's 34, and he wants to sign another extension upon that. Now, that would put him at some point, I assume, in his late 30s, making over $50 million. It wouldn't be unheard of, and it'd be a better contract than Gobert's contract, but for him to say that that's what he wants, is to just stay in Portland and make as much money as he can, kind of makes me question on how much he really does want to win. Because he might want to win at the end of the day, but he might not just value it more than his money, right? Which, if that's the way it is, I don't blame him for that. If you can make that kind of money in a year, if you make almost half of $100 million in a year, what the... I'm not going to stop nobody from doing that. Get your bag, right? I cannot hate a player for getting his bag. But when you're a guy that wants to have a legacy and is supposed to be considered a top 75 player of all time and this and that, that shouldn't be your primary priority. Your primary priority should be get your bag. But you're going to get that wherever you are. So, yes, you might not make over 50 somewhere else because of the super max extension rules and everything like that for the Trailblazers, which makes it easier for him to make more money there by a substantial amount in the long term, right? But if you go to another team and you make $10 million less and you win a championship, I think people are going to respect Damian Lillard's career a lot more by the time things dwindle down. And I think a big thing to look at here is John Wall. Now, this isn't something you would typically think about when you're talking about Damian Lillard, like, oh, let's talk about John Wall. But when you look at John Wall was a guy that was at the top of his career, got injured, made his money and everything like that. But now, he can't be traded. He can't play for a team that he wants to. He's just stuck making his money on a bad team. And although I think Damian Lillard's career will progress into his future and everything like that, and the reason John Wall's career really went downhill was injuries. Damian Lillard's got the outside shot and everything like that. It should progress forward. I know he had a rocky start to the season, but he's got the feel of things again now, and he'll be fine. But, are we saying that Damian Lillard is still going to be, or is going to be a $50 million level player when he's 38 years old? I think that's by far and away a no. And so if he does end up getting this contract extension, pretty much Portland locks themselves in until about 2030 to being able to potentially compete for another championship or something like that with a new roster, because right now Damian Lillard, like I said, is under contract until 23-24 and then has a player option for 24-25 season. If he signs an extension, more than likely that would be another 4 years. So really, not 2030 that they would be contending. But that'd be another 4 years, putting him at about 2029 at like the age of 38, which is kind of what I was saying, to end his extension after the contract he's on right now. And if he did that, then he would, it's very, LeBron is old and is good, but he's not quite what he was, and we know that. He's still one of the best players in the league, but he's not what he was. And LeBron's case is very rare for what we've seen out of him. Now, to expect a guy like Damian Lillard, a guy who's put so many, he's been the primary option on the Blazers for as long as I can remember at this point. To expect a guy like that to just keep doing that for another 8 years is a bit interesting. And if I was a Blazers fan, this is where I would really start to think, do I want the next decade of me being a fan of this team to be entirely centered on how Damian Lillard can perform? And personally, I'm not a Blazers fan, but I wouldn't want that if I was a fan of the Blazers. Personally, that's not what I would want. I would be like, okay, actually, you know what? Let's do right by our guy. Appreciate what he's done for us, but here in, maybe if it's at the end of this year, if you guys are still bad, you make a move there, or if it's next year or something, and you try and shuffle the roster, stuff still doesn't work, and then you do right by your guy and you send him somewhere to contend or whatever. That's what I would want if I was a Blazers fan. If you guys aren't able to, kind of jump things back up and compete or whatever. But I would not want to be keeping a star player into, 38 years old, because the risk is just too much on the franchise over the player, right? At that point, the player becomes, even if Damian Lillard's game continues to translate well as he ages and everything like that, he won't be a top 10 player making $50 million. And if you're making $50 million, you're on a supermax, you're supposed to be one of the top 30 players in the NBA, because every team realistically could have a supermax player on the roster. So you need to be one of the 30 best players in the entire NBA at that point. And I don't know if Damian Lillard at age 38 would be that. Even if his game translates well. Like, he would probably eventually slowly regress towards the mean of an NBA player. Which isn't somebody you want to be paying that much amount to. And as the salary cap will continue to increase as years go on and stuff like that, it's not going to increase enough to the point where a $50 million contract is something you can just waive or whatever, easily trade, and it won't be much of an issue to your team. Like, that would be something that would hinder your team for a few years. And if you were trying to rebuild or something like that at that point, that makes that even more difficult, because then you are paying such a large salary cap to him, so you can't take a chance on like young players in free agency or something like that. Something that we've seen the Cavaliers do, where they took a chance on like Lauri Markkanen, or the Bulls. They, I guess they traded for LaVine, but I think the Kings tried to sign away LaVine when he went into restricted free agency this last time that he was in free agency, right? Like, you can't take opportunities on young guys to help further your rebuild in free agency if you have such a massive contract on the payroll. And so if the Blazers don't end up working out, and at this point it doesn't, all signs show to them not being a team that will be winning a championship anytime soon. Now, anything can happen in the offseason, and we know that very, very well, but it would be scary if I was a Blazers fan. So I guess the question I want to propose is Damian Lillard's loyalty worth what, the cost of it is? And really at this point, the cost of it looks to be never winning an NBA championship. Or do you guys think that, maybe eventually taking a different path from him and for the Blazers would be best for both parties? It's something to think about. It's something we've kind of been looking at for years, almost seemingly doing a case study on. And with the firing of the GM, I mean, if you bring in a new guy that wants to rebuild and you can kind of get things going there, why not start it like this offseason or something like that if you're not going to be a great team? Or trade away some assets mid-season and then really full-blown go rebuild this offseason if you just don't think that you're going to win a championship. Because if you're not going to win a championship, at the end of the day, yes, it's cool to kind of sit in the middle for a little bit, to kind of get your feet in the water or whatever when you're a young team. But when you're an older team at this point, sitting in the middle, all it does is just delay the inevitable of you having to rebuild. So if you can get a jump on that, that just means that that's the sooner that you'll potentially be back at the position where maybe you can compete for a championship again. So, I don't know, something interesting to think about. I definitely wanted to talk about this in today's video because I saw this report and I was kind of shocked. I was like, wow, that is where it appears at this point that the priorities are for these parties, is to kind of just continue to ride things out. So, I don't know. Very interested, very interested. That's going to be it from me today, though, guys. Let me know, where do you guys think Damian Lillard would end up if he doesn't stay with the Blazers. And yeah, appreciate everybody for watching. So I'll catch you all next time. Peace out, guys.